The Battle of El Alamein, when the Axis was stopped. The desert, endless, silent, unforgiving, stretching from the Libyan sands to the Egyptian frontier. It became the battlefield where the destiny of empires would be decided. Long before the first shots were fired, the tension was already in the air. Benito Mussolini, the Italian dictator, dreamed of building a new Roman Empire, a vision that included North Africa as the jewel of his conquest. Italy had occupied Libya since 1911. But by 1940, with Europe at war, Mussolini saw an opportunity. He believed Britain was weak, its forces scattered, its empire vulnerable. Benito Mussolini: "We will march to Cairo, and from there, the Mediterranean will be ours." Yet behind the grand words, the Italian army was not ready. Supplies were limited, tanks were outdated, morale was fragile. Still, in September 1940, Italy launched its invasion of Egypt. 10 divisions crossed the border, advancing into the harsh desert. The British watched carefully. Their position in Egypt was critical. The Suez Canal was the lifeline of the empire. Without it, Britain would lose access to India, the Middle East, and the oil beyond. Winston Churchill: "If the Suez falls, we are cut in half. We must hold it at any cost." The Italian advance was slow, cautious, and uncertain. They reached only as far as Sidi Barrani in western Egypt. Instead of pressing forward to Alexandria or Cairo, they dug in, building fortified camps in the desert. For Britain, this hesitation was a gift. Under the command of General Archibald Wavell, the British prepared a counterstrike. What followed was Operation Compass. A small force of only 30,000 British and Commonwealth troops attacked the Italians. The desert became a storm of fire. By February 1941, the mighty Italian 10th Army was shattered. 130,000 Italian soldiers were taken prisoner. Entire divisions vanished into the sands. A British officer's secret report, Top Secret File, 1941, the Italian collapse was total. Their troops lacked the will to fight. Their commanders, the vision to lead. Mussolini was humiliated. His dream of glory turned into a disaster. But he had a powerful ally: Adolf Hitler. Hitler could not allow Italy to lose North Africa. If Britain gained total control, the Mediterranean would become an Allied sea. So he acted. He sent reinforcements, the Deutsches Afrika Korps. At its head was a general who had already made his name in France. Young, dynamic, unpredictable. His name, Erwin Rommel, soon to be called the Desert Fox. Erwin Rommel. In the desert, speed and surprise are the weapons of victory. Rommel arrived in Tripoli in February 1941. Almost immediately, he defied orders. Instead of waiting for full reinforcements, he attacked. His tanks surged across Cyrenaica, catching the British off guard. Within weeks, the British were forced back hundreds of miles. Tobruk was surrounded. Rommel's reputation grew with each victory. But the desert was no ordinary battlefield. Supply lines stretched across hundreds of miles. Convoys faced British naval attacks in the Mediterranean. Every drop of fuel, every bullet, was precious. A German intelligence file, classified, later declassified in 1970, Rommel's boldness relies entirely on fragile supply routes. If cut, his campaign will collapse. By mid-1941, the struggle in the desert became a war of logistics. The British relied on Alexandria and the Suez. The Axis relied on convoys from Italy, vulnerable to Allied submarines. And then, geography itself became an ally for the defenders. West of Alexandria lay a narrow gap between the Mediterranean Sea and the Qattara Depression, an impassable wasteland of soft sand and salt marsh. There, a town stood, Its name, El Alamein. El Alamein was small, but its location was decisive. It was a natural choke point. If the Axis broke through here, nothing would stop them from reaching Cairo. But if they were stopped here, the tide of war in North Africa could turn. The stage was set. The Desert War had begun, and El Alamein would become its turning point. When Erwin Rommel set foot on North African soil in February 1941, he carried with him not just orders, but ambition. He was 49 years old, a veteran of the Great War, and already celebrated for his daring in the 1940 campaign in France. The desert was a place that suited his style. Wide open, unpredictable. It rewarded speed, risk, and surprise. Qualities Rommel mastered. His Africa Corps was small at first. 2 divisions of German troops sent to rescue Mussolini's collapsing army. But under Rommel's leadership, they moved with the power of 10. Erwin Rommel, the desert is simple. Whoever moves fastest, strikes hardest, wins. Within weeks of arriving, Rommel launched an attack. Berlin had ordered him to hold a defensive line, to wait until supplies and reinforcements arrived. But Rommel refused to sit still. He believed in action. The British, exhausted from their victories over Italy, were caught unprepared. Rommel's tanks swept across Cyrenaica, outflanking strong points, pushing the enemy back mile after mile. Benghazi fell. The British retreated in disorder. In April 1941, Rommel stood at the gates of Tobruk, a strategic port city that the Allies could not afford to lose. The siege of Tobruk began, a brutal, drawn-out struggle in the desert heat. Australian and British forces held the fortress, defying every German assault. A captured diary from an Australian soldier reads, "The Desert Fox throws everything at us, but we will not yield. Tobruk will not fall." For 8 months, Tobruk remained under siege. Rommel attacked again and again, but the defenders stood firm. This stubborn resistance became legendary, a symbol of Allied endurance. Meanwhile, Rommel's reputation in Germany grew. The newspapers hailed him as a hero. He was the Desert Fox, the master of desert warfare. Adolf Hitler. "Rommel is my boldest general. In him, the German spirit finds its finest expression. But behind the glory, problems brewed. Rommel's supply lines stretched dangerously thin. Every tank, every shell, every liter of fuel had to cross the Mediterranean, where British submarines and aircraft hunted relentlessly. A single convoy lost at sea meant days of paralysis for the Africa Corps. Yet Rommel pressed on, gambling everything on momentum. British intelligence also played a role. Through intercepted communications, decoded by the Ultra program at Bletchley Park, the Allies gained insight into Axis plans. A British intelligence officer, top secret memo, 1941, "Rommel's brilliance is real, but so is his recklessness. If we endure, his supplies will strangle him." Despite these warnings, Rommel pressed his attack. In early 1942, he struck again, advancing deep into Egypt. British defenses faltered. Alexandria and Cairo seemed within reach. The British government grew alarmed. The Middle East, the Suez, the oil of Iraq and Persia, all were at stake. Winston Churchill. "We must find a leader who will not retreat, who will fight Rommel as fiercely as he fights us." That leader would soon arrive. But before his arrival, Rommel reached the very edge of triumph. His forces approached El Alamein, a name that would become synonymous with the turning of the tide. By the summer of 1942, Britain's position in North Africa was reaching the breaking point. Rommel's Africa Corps, supplied by Italy and driven by his relentless daring, had pushed the Eighth Army back across Libya, through Cyrenaica, and deep into Egypt itself. By late June, Axis forces stood only 60 miles from Alexandria, the great port city that guarded the eastern Mediterranean, and panic began to spread. In Cairo, officials rushed to burn classified files. Banks prepared to move their gold reserves, and civilians whispered about evacuation, believing that Rommel's tanks might soon roll through the streets. A secret British War Office memo, top secret, June 1942. If Alexandria falls, we must prepare to abandon the Nile Delta and withdraw toward Palestine. In London, Winston Churchill faced a storm of doubt and anger. Parliament questioned the strategy. Newspapers asked if the empire itself was at risk, but Churchill refused to bend. Winston Churchill: "We have had our backs against the wall before, and we have not yielded. We will not yield now." On the desert front, however, the picture was grim. The Eighth Army, a vast force drawn from every corner of the empire, Australians, New Zealanders, Indians, South Africans, alongside weary British regulars, was stretched to the limit. Men fought in unbearable heat. Water was scarce. Rations were thin, and morale was slipping away. Meanwhile, Rommel pressed forward with growing confidence, his tanks striking fast, his infantry following close behind, while the terrifying scream of German Stuka dive bombers filled the skies. Erwin Rommel: "We are at the gates of Egypt. One more blow, and the British will break." Yet Rommel himself faced a silent enemy. Supply. Every shell, every drop of fuel, had to cross the Mediterranean in fragile Italian convoys, and each convoy was hunted by British submarines and bombers. A single convoy lost could cripple his entire army for weeks. The British commanders saw one final chance: geography. Between the Mediterranean coast to the north and the vast, impassable Qattara Depression to the south stretched a narrow corridor of desert, and at its heart, a railway station called El Alamein. If Rommel broke through here, nothing would stop him from reaching Cairo. But if the British held, the tide of the Desert War could change. General Claude Auchinleck: "There is no retreat. We will fight here. If Rommel attacks, he will break upon us." Thus, in July 1942, the First Battle of El Alamein began. Rommel hurled German and Italian divisions against the thin British line. Artillery thundered across the sand. Minefields exploded under the tracks of advancing tanks, and wave after wave of attacks crashed against the defenses. The fighting raged for weeks. The desert floor littered with burned-out vehicles, shattered guns, and the bodies of men who had given everything. The air hung heavy with dust, smoke, and the smell of fuel and death. At last, Rommel's momentum faltered. His fuel was gone, his tanks few, his men exhausted, and his offensive ground to a halt. A German staff officer's report: "Our fuel is gone, our tanks are few, our men are exhausted. The Desert Fox cannot push further." The British had not won a sweeping victory, but they had stopped the advance. For the first time in the Desert War, Rommel was checked, and in that desperate stand, hope returned to Britain, and the world saw that the Axis could be resisted. In early July 1942, the Desert War reached its climax. Rommel's Afrika Korps, though weakened by shortages, had advanced with breathtaking speed. His tanks cutting across the sands, his infantry pressing forward relentlessly. The British retreat seemed endless, and Egypt itself appeared about to fall. But at El Alamein, everything changed. The battlefield was not chosen by chance. El Alamein lay on a narrow strip of land between the Mediterranean to the north and the Qattara Depression to the south, a natural barrier that tanks and vehicles could not cross. This meant Rommel had only one route forward, straight into the British defenses. For the first time, geography favored the defenders. General Claude Auchinleck. Here at El Alamein, we will make our stand. There is no other line. If we fall here, we lose Egypt. Auchinleck, commander-in-chief of Middle East forces, knew his army was weary. But he also knew Rommel was stretched thin. The Eighth Army, though battered, still numbered nearly 150,000 men, with more than 700 tanks and hundreds of guns. Facing them, Rommel's Africa Corps and Italian divisions numbered about 96,000 men, with only 500 tanks, many of them outdated Italian models. The battle began on July 1, 1942, with a thunderous German attack. Rommel aimed to smash through the northern sector and drive on Alexandria. German panzers surged forward, supported by Italian infantry and the dreaded Stuka dive bombers that screamed across the skies. The British line bent under the pressure, but it did not break. A British War Diary entry, July 2nd. The Germans came at dawn, Stukas overhead, tanks advancing in waves. We fired until the guns burned our hands. Still they came, and still we held. For days, the desert echoed with the roar of artillery and the crash of tank battles. Rommel probed for weakness, shifting his attacks south, then north again. But each time, he found the way blocked, by minefields, by anti-tank guns, by determined infantry who refused to yield. By mid-July, the battle became a brutal war of attrition. Temperatures soared above 45 degrees Celsius. Water was rationed to a single canteen per man per day. Flies swarmed over every camp. Men fought with exhaustion gnawing at their bodies, and the wounded often lay for hours in the desert sun before help arrived. Erwin Rommel. The British fight stubbornly. The desert itself conspires with them. We advance a mile, and it costs us 100 men. Despite the suffering, the Eighth Army held firm. Indian troops fought with bayonets in desperate close combat. Australian infantry defended ridges with machine guns until their last bullets were gone. South African gunners destroyed wave after wave of Axis tanks, even as their own positions were shelled to ruins. The battle raged through July. Both sides suffered terrible losses. Rommel lost more than 10,000 men and hundreds of tanks. The British, too, paid dearly, with over 13,000 casualties. Yet when the smoke cleared, the line at El Alamein still stood. A top-secret British intelligence report, July 1942. Rommel is exhausted. His fuel is nearly gone, his tanks are worn, his men stretched to the limit. The tide is turning. By the end of the month, Rommel was forced to halt. For the first time, his advance had been stopped, not by lack of daring, but by the determination of his enemies and the limits of his supply. El Alamein had not yet seen its greatest battle, but already it had become a symbol of resistance. And in London, when the news arrived that Rommel had been held, the relief was immense. Britain knew the war in the desert was not lost. For the first time in months, hope returned. Winston Churchill. Before Alamein, we never had a victory. After Alamein, we shall never have a defeat. After the first Battle of El Alamein, the desert front grew silent, but only for a moment. Both sides were exhausted, both licking their wounds, both gathering strength for what would come next. The British had stopped Rommel, but they had not defeated him. His Africa Corps remained dangerous, and his reputation as the Desert Fox still haunted Allied morale. In London, Winston Churchill realized that simply holding the line was not enough. Britain needed not just defense, but victory. And for that, a change in command was necessary. General Auchinleck, though respected, had lost Churchill's confidence. The Prime Minister demanded new leadership, bold, determined, relentless. Winston Churchill: "I must have generals who can win. Defeat is not an option. We need an iron will in the desert." Thus, in August 1942, a new commander arrived, Lieutenant General Bernard Montgomery. He was methodical, disciplined, and utterly confident. Where Rommel inspired through daring, Montgomery inspired through organization. He believed in preparation, in morale, and in overwhelming strength before striking. Montgomery's first act was to rebuild the spirit of the Eighth Army. He toured the camps, speaking to soldiers from every corner of the empire. He promised them no more retreats, no more withdrawals, only forward. His words, calm but firm, began to restore hope. Bernard Montgomery: "We will stand and fight here. There will be no retreat. If anyone tries to talk of withdrawal, I will have him shot." The effect was electric. Men who had tasted defeat began to believe again. They cleaned their rifles, repaired their tanks, and prepared for what Montgomery called the Great Offensive. Meanwhile, the Allies poured resources into Egypt. Convoys from America and Britain brought hundreds of new Sherman and Grant tanks, thousands of trucks, and mountains of ammunition. The Royal Air Force grew stronger, gaining superiority over the desert skies. Supplies flowed steadily through Alexandria and the Suez Canal, giving Montgomery the edge Rommel could only dream of. Intelligence also tilted the balance. At Bletchley Park in England, British cryptanalysts continued to break German codes. Through ultra-intercepts, Montgomery often knew Rommel's shortages, his convoy routes, even his planned movements, before Rommel himself acted. A British intelligence officer, top secret memo, August 1942. "Rommel fights brilliantly, but blind. Montgomery will see through his eyes before the Desert Fox can move." Rommel, meanwhile, was ill. Months of strain and exhaustion, combined with limited supplies and malaria, weakened him. He begged Hitler for reinforcements and fuel, but the Eastern Front consumed Germany's strength. The supplies that did arrive were often destroyed by Allied submarines and bombers. By October 1942, Montgomery had transformed the battlefield. The Eighth Army now numbered more than 195,000 men, supported by 1,000 tanks, 900 artillery guns, and near-total air superiority. Rommel, by contrast, commanded barely 100,000 men and 500 tanks, many of them inferior Italian models. Montgomery studied the ground carefully. He planned to smash through the Axis line north of El Alamein, using overwhelming artillery and infantry assaults, then unleash his armored divisions to exploit the breach. It would not be a quick battle. It would be a test of endurance. Bernard Montgomery: "I will fight this battle in my own way. It will be hard. It will be long. But in the end, we will destroy Rommel." The soldiers knew something decisive was coming. Camps buzzed with preparation. Engineers laid vast minefields, called the Devil's Gardens, stretching for miles across the desert. Artillery units dug in, waiting for the signal to unleash the greatest bombardment the desert had ever seen. On both sides, tension grew. For Rommel, weakened and undersupplied, El Alamein was a gamble he could not afford to lose. For Montgomery, it was the chance to deliver the first great British victory of the war. The desert, once silent, now trembled with expectation. And on the horizon, the storm of the Second Battle of El Alamein was about to break. On the night of October 23, 1942, the desert exploded with fire. At precisely 9:40 p.m., more than 900 British artillery guns opened fire in unison. The earth shook. The sky lit up with flame. And the Second Battle of El Alamein had begun. For 5.5 hours, the bombardment roared without pause. Shells rained down on German and Italian positions, shattering bunkers, cutting wire, and churning the desert into smoke and flame. Soldiers of the 8th Army advanced behind the thunder. Infantry crawling forward through minefields, engineers cutting lanes, while tracer rounds lit the night like lightning. Bernard Montgomery. The enemy must be crushed where he stands. We will advance with the full weight of our army, and we will not stop until victory is ours. The plan was deliberate, methodical. Montgomery ordered the attack on the northern sector, where the desert corridor was narrowest. Australian, New Zealand, Indian, and South African troops spearheaded the assault, each advancing under the cover of artillery. Behind them, armored divisions waited to exploit any breach. The minefields, the Devil's Gardens laid by Rommel, were thick with explosives. Sappers worked under fire, clearing paths with bayonets, with bare hands, with sacrifice. Many fell, but the lanes slowly opened, and the British armor began to push forward. Rommel, bedridden in Germany due to illness, returned to North Africa midway through the battle. He found his army under relentless pressure, short of fuel, short of ammunition, and stretched across a line they could barely hold. Erwin Rommel. We fight against overwhelming odds, but retreat is forbidden. We must hold, or we are lost. For days, the desert shook with the fury of battle. British artillery pounded day and night. The RAF ruled the skies, bombing Axis supply dumps, strafing convoys, and scattering enemy columns. German and Italian soldiers fought desperately, counterattacking with what tanks they had left. But their strength was fading. By October 28, Montgomery shifted his assault. A massive push known as Operation Supercharge targeted the weakened center of the Axis line. Waves of infantry stormed forward, followed by hundreds of British and American-built Sherman and Grant tanks. The desert was a sea of fire, tracers, explosions, the clash of steel. A British tank commander's report. We advanced into a storm of fire. The sky red with tracers, the ground shaking beneath us. Still we pushed on, for we knew this was the moment. Rommel tried to rally his men. Panzer divisions counterattacked with ferocity, but they lacked fuel. Many German tanks were abandoned, their crews forced to fight on foot. Italian divisions, battered and outgunned, began to collapse under the relentless weight of the Allied assault. On November 2nd, the decisive moment came. British armor smashed through the center of Rommel's line. The breach widened hour by hour. Axis units fell back in disarray. Smoke and dust filled the desert sky as retreat turned into chaos. Winston Churchill. This is not the end. It is not even the beginning of the end. But it is, perhaps, the end of the beginning. By November 4th, the Axis line had broken completely. Rommel ordered a retreat westward, leaving behind thousands of prisoners, hundreds of tanks, and a shattered army. For the first time, the Desert Fox had been defeated decisively. The desert, once a place of endless Axis victories, now witnessed their greatest defeat. El Alamein was not just a battle. It was the turning of the tide. When the dust settled after the Second Battle of El Alamein, the course of the war in North Africa had changed forever. Rommel, once seen as unstoppable, had been forced into retreat. His Africa Corps, once feared across the desert, was shattered. Thousands of prisoners marched into Allied camps. Hundreds of Axis tanks lay burned in the sand, and the long myth of German invincibility was broken. Winston Churchill. Before Alamein, we never had a victory. After Alamein, we shall never have a defeat. The victory was more than military. It was psychological. For 2 years, Britain had endured defeat after defeat. Dunkirk, Greece, Crete, Tobruk. El Alamein was the first great British-led triumph of the war, and it electrified morale, not only in London, but across the empire. Soldiers in India, Australia, and South Africa read the headlines and knew that their sacrifices had turned the tide. For the Axis, the consequences were grave. Italy's armies, already battered, never recovered. German forces in North Africa were thrown onto the defensive, retreating westward through Libya, pursued relentlessly by the 8th Army. Within months, they would be trapped in Tunisia, crushed between British forces advancing from the east and American troops landing in Operation Torch from the west. A German officer's diary. El Alamein was the end. From that day, we no longer attacked. We only retreated. The battle also shifted global strategy. The United States, newly engaged in the war, saw in El Alamein the proof that the Allies could win. Confidence grew that one day, a cross-channel invasion of Europe, what would become D-Day, was possible. The victory in Egypt was a beacon of hope, illuminating a dark war. Montgomery became a hero in Britain. His calm leadership and iron discipline had delivered victory. Rommel, though still respected for his brilliance, had been dealt a blow from which he would never fully recover. The Desert Fox had met his match, and the desert itself, silent once more, bore the scars of history. Minefields stretching for miles, rusting wrecks of tanks, and the graves of tens of thousands of men from every corner of the world. Bernard Montgomery. It was not just a battle of men, but of will. And in the end, our will was stronger. The legacy of El Alamein endures. It was not only the turning point of the Desert War, but one of the decisive moments of the Second World War. A place where the tide of history shifted, where despair gave way to hope, and where the Allies proved that the Axis could be stopped. And now, what do you think? Was El Alamein the true turning point of the Second World War? Or was it only the beginning of a much greater struggle yet to come?